October 17, 1942, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Harmon School of Music on Chestnut Street, 3 blocks from Independence Hall. Evelyn Marsh, 25 years old, violin instructor, opened the classroom door and froze. Sitting on a chair by the window was a girl of about 10, holding a violin as if it were a fragile bird she dared not crush or release. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. Beside her stood a man in an expensive gray suit, tall, with graying temples and a face familiar to every Philadelphia music lover. Thurston Caldwell, principal conductor of the Academy of Music Orchestra, winner of multiple awards, pride of the Philadelphia cultural scene. He smiled the smile of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "Miss Marsh, allow me to introduce my ward, Dorothy. She's exceptionally talented. 3 years ago, I took her from the Children's Aid Society facility on Broad Street. The child lost her parents in a tragic accident, but her musical abilities are outstanding. I see tremendous potential in her." The girl didn't raise her eyes. She stared at the floor, and Evelyn noticed something strange. Dorothy's fingers on the violin's fingerboard lay in absolutely correct position, perfect form, but her knuckles had gone white from tension, as if she were gripping not an instrument but the edge of a cliff. Evelyn nodded, walked the conductor to the door. He paused in the doorway. ___quote_1__. He left, trailing expensive cologne and a barely perceptible sensation of cold. Evelyn sat at the piano. The hallway outside fell silent, footsteps faded. They were alone. __quote_2___. The girl raised her bow. Her movements were mechanically precise, rehearsed to the point of automaticity. And she began to play. Technically, it was flawless. Every note fell exactly right. Transitions were clean, intonation precise. But there was no soul in the sound. It was as if a mechanism were playing, programmed for perfection. As if someone had placed sheet music in a child's hands and said, "Repeat. Just repeat. Without errors. Without feelings. Without the right to breathe naturally." Evelyn listened and felt growing alarm. She'd worked at the music school for 3 years, had seen hundreds of students, talented and talentless, lazy and diligent. She'd seen children who played off-key but with such passion it made you want to cry. She'd seen virtuosos whose technique outpaced their emotions by years. She'd seen those who feared the stage and those who blossomed on it. But she'd never seen this. This was fear, clothed in musical notes. Evelyn said. Dorothy froze. Her lips trembled, but she didn't utter a sound. She simply began playing the same scale with the same dead precision, not changing a thing by even a fraction. Like a wind-up doll that had been wound and released, Evelyn came closer, crouched beside her to be at the girl's eye level. __quote_5___. The girl flinched so sharply that the bow slipped from the strings with a pitiful screech. Her face went pale. Evelyn saw the pupils dilate, saw the fingers clench even tighter on the fingerboard. Dorothy slowly nodded. Then, as if overcoming enormous resistance, whispered, These were the first words Evelyn had heard from her, and in those words was something that made her heart clench, some ancient, inhuman terror, too adult for a 10-year-old child. After the lesson, when the conductor came for Dorothy, Evelyn walked them to the exit and returned to the classroom. On the music stand lay the sheet the girl had used for the scale. Evelyn picked it up to put it in the cabinet and noticed a drawing in the margins. It was a floor plan, schematic but clear. Rectangles labeled in childish handwriting: kitchen, hallway, big room, small room, bathroom. And beside each rectangle, notes. Next to the kitchen, __quote_8___. Next to the hallway, __quote_9___. Next to the big room, underscore underscore quote underscore 10 underscore underscore. Next to the bathroom, underscore underscore quote underscore 11 underscore underscore. Next to the small room, underscore underscore quote underscore 12 underscore underscore. The last word was crossed out so hard the paper had torn through. Evelyn stood holding the sheet, feeling cold crawl up her spine. She folded the paper, placed it in the desk drawer, but the thought of it wouldn't release her all evening. She walked home along Market Street, past Independence Hall, past the Betsy Ross house, looking at the darkening October sky, thinking about that drawing. About how a 10-year-old child draws a map of her own home with notes about where she can't breathe. About what those rules meant. About what would happen if they were broken. At home, in her small rented room on Spruce Street, she sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. The city was preparing for another night of blackout drills. War had changed everything. Young men were shipping overseas. Families lived with rationing cards and victory gardens. Everyone was making sacrifices. But what sacrifice was Dorothy making? And for what? For whose victory? She couldn't sleep until morning. 3 weeks later, November 7th, 1942. Evelyn walked through Rittenhouse Square, watching mothers with baby carriages, old men feeding pigeons, young couples strolling arm in arm. The war was on everyone's mind. But on this autumn Saturday, Philadelphia seemed peaceful, almost untouched. She thought about Dorothy. In those weeks, the girl had come to lessons 4 times, always accompanied by the conductor or his wife, Miriam, a silent woman in an expensive fur coat who never smiled once. Caldwell had married her in 1938, 5 years after divorcing his first wife, Margaret. Miriam had been much younger, 23 to his 39. She was quiet, unnoticeable, perfectly obedient. Never asked questions, never made eye contact, spoke only when asked. She reminded Evelyn of a shadow, always present, never substantial. Dorothy played with the same technical perfection and absolute deadness, and each time she left drawings in the margins of her sheet music. Evelyn collected them. Now she had 6 sheets. The apartment layouts repeated, but the notes became more detailed. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 13, underscore, underscore, underscore. One drawing was especially strange. A rectangle labeled underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 14, underscore, underscore, with a tiny stick figure inside labeled underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 15, underscore, underscore. Next to it, numbers. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 16, underscore, underscore. And beneath the numbers, another note, almost erased. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 17, underscore, underscore. Evelyn showed the sheets to her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elementary school teacher who'd been working with children for 20 years. Mrs. Patterson turned them over in her hands slowly, studying each one with growing concern. She shrugged, but her voice was uncertain. Children draw all sorts of things. Maybe it's some kind of game. Hide and seek. My students have vivid imaginations too. But there was no conviction in her voice. When she handed the sheets back, she said quietly, "Evelyn, if you think something's wrong, don't ignore it. I've seen what happens when adults look the other way. It haunts you." Evelyn decided to speak with Dorothy directly. November 14th, after the lesson, when the conductor had lingered in the hallway talking with the school director about new student enrollment, Evelyn crouched beside the girl. "Dorothy, tell me, are things good at home?" The girl nodded, too quickly, too mechanically. "Does someone hurt you?" Dorothy froze. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth, and Evelyn saw something desperate flash in the girl's eyes, as if she wanted to scream but couldn't. As if words were locked behind some invisible barrier, fighting to get out but unable to cross. But Caldwell appeared in the doorway. "Dorothy, gather your things. Time to go." His voice was soft, almost tender, but the girl jerked as if struck. She grabbed the violin, shoved the music into her folder, and ran from the classroom without even saying goodbye. The conductor lingered at the threshold, looked at Evelyn with a long gaze. "Miss Marsh, I heard you've been asking Dorothy strange questions. Please focus on the music. Child rearing is our family prerogative. I have my own methods, proven over years. They've produced results. Dorothy is progressing beautifully. I expect her to perform at the Academy's spring recital. She will make me proud." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. In those eyes was something cold, appraising, calculating. The look of a man who measured everything, including people, and found most wanting. Evelyn said nothing. When the door closed, she went to the window and saw them getting into a black Packard. Caldwell opened the rear door, Dorothy climbed inside, and before the door shut, Evelyn saw the conductor place his hand on the back of the girl's neck. Not a caress, a placement. Heavy, controlling, possessive. And Dorothy shrank, became smaller, as if trying to dissolve into air. Evelyn returned to the desk, took out all 6 sheets, spread them before her, and suddenly saw what she hadn't noticed before. The diagrams fit together into a unified map. Placed correctly, they formed the layout of a large apartment. 5 rooms, a long hallway, kitchen, bathroom, balcony. And in one room labeled quote, 24 was the drawn closet. The very one where the little stick figure labeled quote, 25 sat for 4, for 6, for 9 hours. Evelyn felt something break inside. She took the sheets, folded them into an envelope, put on her coat, and went outside. November wind from the Delaware River hit her face, but she barely felt it. Her mind was racing. This wasn't just strictness. This wasn't discipline. This was systematic cruelty designed to break a child's spirit. The next morning, Sunday, she took the trolley to West Philadelphia, to the office of the Child Welfare Agency on Lancaster Avenue. It was closed on weekends. She stood on the sidewalk, looking at the dark windows, clutching the envelope with the drawings. A middle-aged man in a worn coat passed by, stopped, looked at her with concern. "You all right, miss?" "Yes, thank you. I need to report something, but they're closed." "Come back Monday morning. They open at 8 sharp. Whatever it is, I hope they can help." She nodded, thanked him, went home, spent Sunday pacing her small apartment on Spruce Street, unable to eat, unable to read, unable to do anything but think about Dorothy locked in that closet. In the darkness. For hours. While Thurston Caldwell, celebrated conductor, sat in his study listening to recordings of Brahms and Beethoven, sipping brandy, reading the newspaper, living his life as if a terrified child weren't suffering 10 feet away. Monday, November 16th, 8 o'clock sharp. Evelyn stood at the agency entrance. A young woman in a navy dress opened the door, looked at her questioningly. "I need to report a case of child abuse." The woman's expression shifted immediately from polite curiosity to focused concern. Quote, 30 She led Evelyn to a small office on the 2nd floor. Evelyn sat across from a social worker named Mrs. Helen Gregory, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a tired face that suggested she'd seen too much suffering. Evelyn laid out the 6 sheets of music paper one by one. "This is Dorothy Caldwell, 10 years old, ward of Thurston Caldwell, the conductor. She's my violin student. She draws these during lessons." Mrs. Gregory studied the papers in silence. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern to something harder, colder. She picked up each sheet, examined it closely, read every notation. When she reached the drawing of the closet, she stopped, stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at Evelyn. "These notes. Can't cry, closet, hours of isolation. Miss Marsh, this is very serious. But you understand who we're talking about?" Thurston Caldwell is one of the most prominent men in Philadelphia. He has connections to the mayor's office, to the orchestra board, to wealthy donors throughout the city. He sits on charitable committees. He's conducted for the president. Accusing him without concrete proof, it could destroy your career. It could destroy you. I understand, Evelyn said quietly, but I'm looking at a child who's being destroyed. I can't walk past that. I won't. If I do nothing, if I pretend I don't see this, then what kind of person am I? What kind of teacher? What kind of human being? Mrs. Gregory nodded slowly. All right, I'll open an investigation. We'll visit the home, speak with the child separately. But, Miss Marsh, I must warn you, this could become very complicated. Very uncomfortable for you personally. Mr. Caldwell will fight back. He has resources. Are you prepared for that? Yes. Then we'll proceed. I admire your courage. Not many people would risk what you're risking. The investigation began November 18th. Mrs. Gregory and another social worker, accompanied by a police officer, appeared at the Caldwell residence on Delancey Place, a prestigious street lined with elegant townhouses where old Philadelphia money lived behind polished brass knockers and lace curtains. Thurston Caldwell answered the door himself, his face a mask of polite surprise. Mrs. Gregory, what brings you here? Is this about the Christmas charity drive? I thought we'd settled the details at the board meeting. Mr. Caldwell, we've received a report concerning Dorothy's welfare. We need to speak with her, and with you. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something cold and calculating. __quote _40___. The apartment was exactly as Dorothy had drawn it. Long hallway with expensive Persian runners, 5 rooms filled with antique furniture and oil paintings, gleaming hardwood floors, everything immaculate. Everything perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfection that required constant vigilance, constant control. They spoke with Dorothy alone in the kitchen. The girl sat rigid, hands folded on the table, eyes on the floor. Mrs. Gregory asked gentle questions. Dorothy answered in monosyllables. Yes, no, sometimes. At first, she revealed nothing. Her face was blank, her voice flat. She'd been trained well. Then Mrs. Gregory said softly, Dorothy, your teacher, Miss Marsh, is worried about you. She showed me some drawings you made. Can you tell me about them? Dorothy's entire body went rigid. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. She'd learned not to cry. Long silence. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car passed. Dorothy's hands trembled on the table. Then, barely audible, the closet, the darkness, hours and hours. And the metronome. He puts it right outside the door, so I can hear it through the wood. Tick-tock, tick-tock. He says it teaches discipline, teaches me not to fail, not to cry, not to be weak. He says great musicians are made through suffering, that I should be grateful he cares enough to correct me. Mrs. Gregory's face went pale. She glanced at the police officer. He nodded, understanding. They searched the study, found the closet, small, narrow, filled with old music scores and instrument cases stacked haphazardly. No light inside, no ventilation except a crack under the door. They found marks on the inside of the door, scratches, as if small hands had clawed at the wood in desperation. They found a metronome on the desk, positioned so it could be placed just outside the closet door. They confronted Caldwell in his study. He was calm, almost amused, sitting in his leather chair with a book of Beethoven sonatas open on his lap. Quote, 47. Quote, 48. Quote, 49. Quote, 50. Quote, 51. But Caldwell was right about one thing. He had power. Connections. Within days, his lawyer, Vernon Hayes, senior partner at Blackwell & Hayes, one of Philadelphia's most prestigious firms, was pushing back hard. They filed motions. They questioned Evelyn's credibility, her motives. They hired a private investigator who dug into her background, looking for anything that could discredit her. They suggested she was a disgruntled employee, bitter about not advancing, seeking attention through false accusations. The case stalled. Legal technicalities, procedural delays. Caldwell's lawyer was a master at manipulation, at using the system to protect his client. Dorothy remained in the Caldwell home. Evelyn's lessons with her were terminated. When Evelyn tried to visit the agency, she was told the case was quote, _52 _, and she couldn't be given details. When she called Mrs. Gregory, she was told to be patient, that these things took time. Weeks passed. Thanksgiving came and went. Evelyn spent it alone in her apartment, unable to join in the holiday festivities while Dorothy suffered. December arrived, cold and gray. Snow fell on Philadelphia, covering the streets in white, making everything look clean and peaceful. But Evelyn felt anything but peaceful. She felt helpless, furious. She'd done what she was supposed to do, reported, provided evidence, risked her reputation, and nothing had changed. Then, on December 15th, she received a letter, handwritten in careful script, no return address. The envelope was cheap, the paper thin. __quote _53 __. Evelyn's hands shook as she read. The letter included an address, a boarding house on South Street near the docks, in one of the rougher parts of the city. She went that evening, taking the trolley through neighborhoods that grew progressively seedier, found the building, a 4-story brick structure with peeling paint and cracked windows, climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor, the wood creaking under her feet, knocked on door number 7. The woman who opened it was thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but a fierce determination in her gaze. She looked to be in her mid-30s, though life had aged her beyond her years. She wore a simple dress, mended in several places, and her hands were rough from labor. "Miss Marsh?" "Yes. You're Margaret? Come in, please, quickly." The room was small, shabby, but clean. A single bed with a faded quilt, a table, a chair, a hot plate in the corner. Margaret gestured for Evelyn to sit. "Thank you for coming. I know this is strange, but I've been watching from afar for 8 years, helpless. When I heard about your report through a friend who works at the agency, I knew I had to reach out. You're the first person who's seen what I saw, the first person who's believed." "Tell me everything," Evelyn said. Margaret's story poured out. She'd married Thurston in 1929, when she was 21 and he was 30. He'd been charming at first, attentive, romantic. He'd courted her with flowers and concerts and promises of a beautiful life together. But after Dorothy was born in 1932, everything changed. He became obsessed with control. Every aspect of their lives had to conform to his vision of perfection. Margaret had to dress a certain way, elegant but not flashy, sophisticated but not attention-seeking. She had to speak a certain way, soft-voiced, agreeable, never contradicting him in public. She had to keep the house arranged precisely, furniture at exact angles, floors spotless, everything in its designated place. And when Dorothy was old enough to show musical talent at age 4, he fixated on her completely. He started training her when she was so young, Margaret said, voice breaking. Made her practice for hours. If she cried, he locked her in the closet. If she made mistakes, he'd make her repeat the passage 100 times without stopping, without water, without rest. I tried to intervene, tried to protect her. I'd open the closet door when he left the room, hold her, tell her it would be okay. He found out. He turned on me, said I was undermining her potential, called me weak, pathetic, a failure as a mother, said I was ruining Dorothy's chance at greatness with my sentimentality. The abuse escalated. Thurston controlled the money, the food, when Margaret could leave the house. He monitored her conversations, read her mail, chose her friends. When she tried to take Dorothy and leave in 1934, he was ready. He'd been documenting everything. Every time she forgot to pack Dorothy's lunch, every time she let Dorothy stay up late, every time she gave in to tears instead of discipline, he presented it all to the court, painted her as unstable, neglectful, emotionally unfit. Why didn't you keep fighting? I did. For 2 years. I spent every penny I had on lawyers, but Thurston bled me dry. His lawyer would file motion after motion, forcing me to respond, charging fees I couldn't afford. Finally, I had no money left. I couldn't pay my lawyer anymore. The case collapsed. I've been working as a seamstress ever since, sewing uniforms for the war effort, saving every penny, trying to build a new case. But without new evidence, I had nothing. Until you. And now? Now we have your report. We have Dorothy's drawings. We have testimony from the agency. If you're willing to testify in court, if we can get Dorothy to speak the truth to a judge, we might have a chance. But we need a lawyer, someone who'll work for free or cheap, someone who's willing to fight Thurston's money and power. Evelyn didn't hesitate. __quote_65__. She remembered a young lawyer she'd met at a settlement house where she volunteered teaching music to immigrant children. Robert Harmon. He'd grown up poor in South Philadelphia, worked his way through Temple University Law School washing dishes and cleaning offices. He had a burning hatred of powerful men who abused their privilege and a reputation for taking cases that others wouldn't touch. They worked together for the next 2 months. Robert agreed to take the case pro bono. He was sharp, relentless, hungry for justice. He interviewed Dorothy again, gently, patiently, until she opened up. He gathered statements from neighbors who'd heard strange sounds from the Caldwell apartment. A child crying, a metronome ticking for hours, long silences. He found the doctor who'd treated Dorothy for anxiety and got him to admit he'd suspected abuse but hadn't reported it. He built a case piece by piece. In late January 1943, they filed a motion for emergency removal of Dorothy from Thurston Caldwell's custody, citing child endangerment and psychological abuse. They presented Evelyn's testimony, Dorothy's drawings, the agency's findings, Margaret's account, medical records, witness statements. The hearing was set for February 10th in family court. Thurston's lawyer tried every trick: continuances, challenges to evidence, attacks on witness credibility. He brought character witnesses who testified to Caldwell's reputation, his charity work, his standing in the community. He presented letters from famous musicians praising Caldwell's dedication to musical education. But Judge Eleanor Whitmore, a stern woman in her 50s who'd spent years handling child welfare cases and had seen every manipulation tactic imaginable, saw through it all. On February 12th, after 2 days of testimony that laid bare the systematic cruelty Dorothy had endured, she ruled. Thurston stood, face rigid with barely controlled rage. Dorothy left the courthouse holding her mother's hand for the first time in 8 years. She didn't look back at the man who'd controlled her life. She walked forward, into the February cold, into an uncertain future, but into freedom. The story made the papers, not the front page. The war news dominated that, but the local section. Prominent conductor accused of child abuse. Court removes ward from home. Thurston Caldwell's reputation took a hit, but not a fatal one. He still had supporters. Many in the music world rallied around him, calling it a misunderstanding, a tragedy of good intentions gone awry, the persecution of a dedicated artist by people who didn't understand the rigors of musical training. He kept his position at the Academy of Music for another year before quietly retiring in early 1944, claiming health problems. But Dorothy was free. That was what mattered. Evelyn visited them often in the months that followed. Margaret had found a small apartment in Kensington, a working-class neighborhood far from Delancey Place. It wasn't fancy. 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a walk-up, furniture from second-hand shops, a view of rooftops instead of gardens. But it was warm, safe, theirs. Dorothy slowly began to emerge from her shell like a flower unfurling after a long winter. She smiled sometimes, tentatively at first, then more freely. She laughed, though the sound was rusty from disuse. She still played violin, but differently now, not with mechanical precision, but with something softer, more tentative, more human. Learning to feel again. Learning that mistakes weren't punishable offenses. Learning that music could be joy instead of terror. In June 1943, Evelyn moved to New York to take a position at the Juilliard School. It was a significant opportunity, a chance to work with the most talented young musicians in the country. Before leaving, she visited Dorothy one last time. They sat in the small apartment, drinking weak tea, coffee was rationed, and talking about everything and nothing. Finally, Evelyn asked the question that had been on her mind. "Will you keep playing?" Dorothy nodded. "I think so, but not the way he wanted. I want to play for me now, for the music, not for perfection, not for him. Miss Marsh, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Sometimes I still hear it, the metronome, in my head. Tick-tock, tick-tock. But it's getting quieter, and someday I think it'll stop completely." "It will," Evelyn said. "I promise you it will." They hugged. Evelyn left Philadelphia with a mixture of sadness and relief. She'd done what she could. She'd saved one child. It wasn't enough. There were so many others suffering in silence, behind closed doors, in homes that looked perfect from the outside. But it was something. The war ended in 1945. Evelyn married in 1947, a kind man named James who taught history and loved music. They had 2 children, lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn, and Evelyn continued teaching. She lost touch with Margaret and Dorothy, though she thought of them often, wondered how they were doing, hoped they were happy. Then, in December 1967, she received a letter, postmarked from Boston. The handwriting was elegant, confident. ___, quote, _77__. Evelyn wept when she read it, kept the letter in her desk drawer, took it out sometimes when she needed to remember why teaching mattered, why paying attention mattered, why one person's courage could change everything. She died in 1998, at age 81, in her sleep, surrounded by family. At her funeral, among the flowers and the music students she'd taught over 5 decades, was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair. Dorothy Warren. She played a Bach partita at the service, and in the sound was everything Evelyn had hoped for: beauty, freedom, life. Years passed. Dorothy kept teaching, kept watching. In 2004, at age 72, she was still giving lessons at a small music school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her hands were still steady, her passion for teaching undiminished. She'd married, had children of her own, built a life full of music and love. But she never forgot where she came from. Never forgot the darkness of that closet, the relentless ticking of the metronome, the fear that had shaped her childhood. One afternoon in November, a colleague approached her. Sarah Chen, a young violin instructor, looked worried. "Dorothy, there's a new student in the advanced class. 10 years old, very talented. But something's off. She flinches when the metronome starts, won't make eye contact, plays perfectly but like a robot. I thought maybe you could talk to her. You have a way with difficult students." Dorothy's heart clenched. She knew that description, had lived it. Quote 79, quote 80, quote 81. The next day, Dorothy sat with Emma in an empty practice room. The girl was small, pale, with enormous frightened eyes that reminded Dorothy painfully of her own childhood reflection. Quote 82, quote, the girl shrugged. Quote 83, quote, barely a whisper. Quote 84, quote, Emma froze. Went even paler if that was possible. Dorothy continued gently. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. Dorothy felt her heart break and burn at the same time. She took a breath, chose her words carefully. Emma, listen to me. I'm going to tell you something I don't tell many people. When I was your age, someone hurt me. Someone who was supposed to take care of me. They made me practice until my fingers bled. They locked me in dark places when I made mistakes. They told me I'd never be good enough, and I believed them for a long time. Emma stared at her, tears streaming silently down her face. But then a teacher, someone like me, someone who paid attention, she helped me. She saw what was happening and she didn't look away. She saved me. And I want you to know that if things at home aren't good, if someone is hurting you, you can tell me. I promise you'll be believed. I promise you'll be helped. Because I know what it's like. I've been where you are. The girl stared at her for a long moment. And then, in a rush, the words came tumbling out. About the practice room in the basement of their house. About the hours locked in there when she made mistakes. 6 hours, 8 hours, sometimes all night. About the fear of going home after school. About her father's voice, cold and precise, telling her that weakness was unacceptable, that crying was failure, that perfection was the only option, that she should be grateful he cared enough to push her when other parents let their children be mediocre. Dorothy listened, her hands clenched in her lap to keep them from shaking. She knew this story. She'd lived it. And she knew exactly what to do. Emma, what your father is doing is wrong. It's abuse. It's illegal. I'm going to help you. I promise. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand? Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. But he'll find out. He always finds out, and then nothing. Because you're going to be safe. I'm going to make sure of it. Dorothy went straight to the school administration, then to Child Protective Services. She gave testimony, provided context from her own experience, explained the patterns of abuse. She pushed the system to move fast. And this time, in 2004, the system was better prepared than it had been in 1942. Social workers were trained to recognize psychological abuse. Laws were stronger. Courts were less deferential to wealthy, powerful men. Within 2 weeks, a social worker and child psychologist visited the Richardson home. Emma, supported by Dorothy's words and presence, told the truth. She showed them the basement practice room with its bare walls and single harsh light. She told them about the hours of isolation, the constant criticism, the impossible standards. Her father, Derek Richardson, was a renowned pianist with a resume full of awards and performances. He tried to defend himself, talked about discipline and artistic standards in preparing his daughter for a competitive field. He brought in fellow musicians who testified about the rigors of professional music training. But times had changed. What might have been overlooked or excused in 1942 was prosecuted in 2004. Child welfare laws had evolved. Understanding of psychological trauma had deepened. By January 2005, Derek Richardson had lost custody. Emma went to live with her mother, Sarah, who'd been planning to leave for months but hadn't known how to protect her daughter. She divorced Derek and moved to a different part of the city. The girl continued at the music school. Dorothy took her under her wing, gave her free lessons, simply talked, supported, helped. In December 2005, the school held its annual recital. Emma, for the first time since everything happened, walked onto the stage. She'd chosen to play, and Dorothy had supported that choice. The girl played a simple Bach piece for solo violin, the same piece Dorothy had played at Evelyn's funeral. Not technically perfect, she made a few small mistakes, but she played with soul, with real feeling, with light in her eyes. Dorothy sat in the audience among other students' parents and teachers, watched this girl on stage, and cried quietly, not from sadness but from understanding, because she knew deeply, to her very bones, the circle had closed and opened again at the same time. Evelyn Marsh had saved her, Dorothy, 63 years ago. She, Dorothy, had just saved Emma. Emma, perhaps, would grow up to save someone else. That's how a chain of kindness forms, link by link, opposing the chain of cruelty. That's how the cursed cycle of abuse breaks. That's how darkness is defeated, not all at once, not completely, but one life at a time, one extended hand at a time. After the recital, Dorothy returned home late in the evening to the house she'd shared with her husband for 40 years. He'd passed away 2 years ago, leaving her alone but surrounded by memories of a good life, a life she'd never thought possible when she was 10 years old and locked in darkness. Her children, now adults with families of their own, had gone home. The house was quiet. She went to her room, opened an old wooden cabinet, took down a shoebox from the top shelf. Dusty, tied with string that had yellowed with age. Inside were treasures from a lifetime. Old letters from Evelyn Marsh, yellowed photographs of happier times, a program from her first professional concert in 1967, Evelyn's obituary from the New York Times that she'd carefully cut out and saved. And one sheet of music paper, folded in quarters, that very sheet with the floor plan she'd drawn at age 10 in her first music lesson with Evelyn. Dorothy unfolded it carefully, afraid of tearing the paper fragile with time. Looked at the childish scrawls, at the words written in a trembling hand. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 91, underscore, underscore. And thought about how everything was different now. Now it was allowed. Allowed to cry from joy and from grief. Allowed to laugh loudly. Allowed to make noise, run, make mistakes. Allowed to breathe fully. Allowed simply to live. Because once upon a time, an ordinary music teacher had extended her hand, hadn't walked past, had believed a child's silent scream, had risked everything to help someone she barely knew. Dorothy folded the sheet back carefully, placed it in the box with all her other treasures, closed the lid. Tomorrow she'd go back to work at the music school, would teach students to play violin, would watch their eyes carefully, searching for shadows of fear, would listen not just to the music, but to what lay behind the music, the unspoken pain, the hidden terror, the silent pleas for help that most people missed because they weren't paying attention. And if she saw something, if she heard a cry for help, she would extend her hand. Exactly as Evelyn Marsh had once extended her hand to her. Exactly as she just extended her hand to Emma. Because that's the only thing that truly matters in life. Seeing another's pain, hearing the silent scream, and not walking past, never walking past. The metronome in her head had finally stopped ticking years ago. Now there was only music. The truth is that evil hides in plain sight more often than we want to admit. It wears expensive suits and polished shoes. It speaks with cultured accents and quotes classical composers. It sits on charitable boards and donates to worthy causes. It receives awards and accolades and the respect of communities. And because of all that, we hesitate to see it. We make excuses. We tell ourselves that successful people couldn't possibly be capable of such cruelty. We convince ourselves that children exaggerate, that strict discipline is necessary, that we shouldn't interfere in other families' business. But Evelyn Marsh hadn't hesitated. When she saw those drawings, when she heard the fear in Dorothy's voice, she acted. Not because it was easy or safe or guaranteed to succeed. She acted because it was right. Because a child was suffering and she could help. That choice, that simple, terrifying choice to extend her hand, had rippled forward through time like a stone thrown into still water. Dorothy had survived, had thrived, had built a life full of music and love and meaning. And now she was passing that gift forward to Emma and to every child who came after. This is how we fight darkness. Not with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, though sometimes those are necessary. We fight it with small acts of courage repeated over and over again. With paying attention when it would be easier to look away. With believing children when they're brave enough to speak. With using whatever power and privilege we have to protect those who have none. Emma would heal, Dorothy knew. Not quickly, not completely. Trauma leaves scars that never fully disappear. But she would heal enough to live, to love, to create. And perhaps one day, when she was older and stronger, she would see another child suffering in silence, and she would remember what Dorothy had done for her. And she would extend her own hand, and the chain would continue. That night, Dorothy dreamed of music. Not the mechanical, fearful playing of her childhood, but something else entirely. She dreamed of a great symphony performed by an orchestra of children she'd helped over the years. Emma was there, and dozens of others. Students who'd flinched at loud noises, who'd been too perfect, too controlled, too afraid. In the dream, they played with wild, joyous abandon. They made mistakes and laughed. They improvised and experimented. They played not for an audience of judges, but for the pure love of sound. And standing in the back of the hall, watching with tears streaming down her face, was Evelyn Marsh. Younger than Dorothy remembered her, wearing the same navy dress she'd worn to court in 1943. She caught Dorothy's eye and smiled, nodded once, then faded away like morning mist. Dorothy woke with tears on her own face, but they were good tears, healing tears. The metronome in her head was silent. There was only music now, only love, only the knowledge that one person's courage, repeated across generations, could change the world one child at a time. And that was enough. It had to be enough, because it was all we had. Years later, in 2018, Emma Richardson stood before a classroom of graduate students at the Berklee College of Music. She was 34 years old now, a successful violinist and professor, known for her innovative teaching methods and her fierce advocacy for students' mental health. She never talked publicly about her own childhood, but those who worked closely with her sensed there was a story there, something that had shaped her approach to music education, something that made her hyper-aware of the subtle signs of student distress. Today, she was giving a guest lecture on pedagogy. The title? Quote 92, quote 93, she told the room full of aspiring teachers. Quote 94. She clicked to the next slide. It showed a simple drawing, a rectangle labeled underscore underscore quote 95 underscore underscore with a small stick figure inside. Underscore underscore quote underscore 96 underscore underscore. The room was silent. Students leaned forward, listening intently. Underscore underscore quote underscore 97 underscore underscore. She paused, letting that sink in. Quote 98. Emma looked out at the young faces before her. Some were nodding. Some looked uncomfortable. Good. This wasn't meant to be comfortable. I'm going to tell you something my teacher told me when I was struggling. The music will wait. The technique will wait. But a child in pain cannot wait. Save the person first. The musician will follow. After the lecture, a young woman approached her. She was maybe 22, with nervous hands and downcast eyes. Professor Richardson? Can I talk to you for a minute? Of course. They found a quiet corner. The young woman, her name was Lily, spoke haltingly at first, then faster. About her younger sister, 12 years old, studying at a prestigious music academy. About the sudden change in her sister's personality, from joyful to withdrawn, from confident to fearful. About overhearing their father, a former concert violinist whose career had been cut short by injury, talking about, quote, 102, quote, and, quote, 103, quote. Emma listened, heart pounding. This story, this same story repeating again across time. Lily asked. Emma pulled out her phone, scrolled through her contacts, found a number. Lily took the number with shaking hands. Quote 109. Quote 110. Emma watched her walk away, then leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. This weight she carried, this knowledge of how evil could disguise itself as excellence, how abuse could masquerade as dedication. It never got easier. Every time she heard these stories, she was back in that basement practice room, locked in darkness, listening to her father's footsteps overhead. But she also thought of Dorothy, patient, kind Dorothy who'd seen past her fear and had risked everything to save her. Dorothy who'd taught her that survival wasn't enough. You had to turn your pain into purpose. She pulled out her phone again, dialed a familiar number. __quote _111 __. Dorothy's warm laugh came through the line. You don't have to thank me every time something reminds you. Yes, I do. You saved my life, and today I might have helped save someone else's, your student's younger sister. It's the same pattern, the same... I know, Dorothy said gently. I know. It never ends, does it? We just keep passing the torch forward. Speaking of which, I have something to tell you. Remember that little girl I mentioned last month? The piano student with the bruises she tried to hide? Yes. We got her out. Her mother finally found the courage to leave. They're in a shelter now, but they're safe. She's already playing differently. Less fear, more joy. Emma closed her eyes, felt tears threaten. That's wonderful. It is, and it's because of Evelyn, and because of you. This chain we're building, it's stronger than the darkness. I truly believe that. They talked for a few more minutes, then said goodbye. Emma stood in the empty hallway, thinking about chains, about how abuse passed from generation to generation, parent to child to grandchild, unless someone broke the cycle. About how that breaking took tremendous courage but could be done, was being done, was happening right now in countless small moments of bravery across the country. She thought about Evelyn Marsh, whom she'd never met but whose courage in 1942 had created ripples that reached all the way to 2018. About Dorothy, who turned her trauma into a life mission. About herself, and the dozens of students she'd helped recognize and escape harmful situations over the years. And she thought about the future, about children not yet born who would benefit from choices being made today, about teachers in classrooms right now paying attention, extending hands, refusing to look away. The metronome in her head, the one she'd inherited from Dorothy, who'd inherited it from Thurston Caldwell, had stopped ticking years ago. Now there was only music, real music, free music, music that healed instead of hurt. She picked up her violin case and headed home. Tomorrow she'd follow up with Lily, make sure she'd made the call. Tomorrow she'd check in with her current students, watch for signs, listen for the things left unsaid. Tomorrow she'd continue the work. But tonight she'd play, just for herself, just for joy. Because that's what Evelyn and Dorothy had fought for. Not perfect technique or prestigious careers or Carnegie Hall performances. They'd fought for the simple right of a child to experience music as joy instead of terror, to play without fear, to make mistakes without punishment, to breathe. Emma had that now, and she'd spend the rest of her life making sure other children had it too. The chain continued, the torch passed forward, the darkness pushed back, one extended hand at a time. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go after death, Evelyn Marsh smiled. Her courage in 1942 had saved one child. That child had saved another, and that child had saved another. And on, rippling forward through time, multiplying, spreading, creating light in dark places. One person's choice to not look away had changed the world. Not all at once, not completely, but enough. Always enough. Because love, real love, the kind that sees suffering and responds, that risks safety for justice, that refuses to be silent in the face of cruelty, that kind of love is stronger than darkness. It has to be. It's all we have. And it's everything. In 2024, 20 years after Dorothy had saved Emma, a documentary filmmaker named Rachel Torres began researching a project about child abuse in elite musical training programs. She'd heard whispers, rumors, stories that never quite made it to official reports. Children pushed to breaking points. Parents who saw their offspring as extensions of their own failed dreams. Teachers who confused cruelty with rigor. She started with public records, court cases, newspaper archives. That's when she found the story of Dorothy Caldwell and Thurston Caldwell, buried in Philadelphia newspapers from 1943. A prominent conductor accused of child abuse. A young teacher who'd risked everything to save a student. A mother who'd fought for 8 years to reclaim her daughter. Rachel tracked down Emma Richardson, now a well-known music educator and advocate. They met in a coffee shop in Boston on a gray March afternoon. "Why do you want to make this documentary?" Emma asked after Rachel explained her project. "Because these stories need to be told," Rachel said. "Because people still don't want to believe that respected, successful people can be monsters. Because children are still suffering in silence. And because I think if we trace the through line from then to now, we might be able to prevent future suffering." Emma studied her for a long moment. Then, "I'll help you, but you need to understand something. This isn't just about exposing abuse. It's about showing what courage looks like. It's about demonstrating that one person really can make a difference. Tell me." So Emma told her, not just her own story, but Dorothy's. And Evelyn's. She traced the chain backward and forward, showing how one act of courage in 1942 had cascaded through decades, touching hundreds of lives. "Dorothy died last year," Emma said quietly. She was 92. At her funeral, there were over 300 people. Do you know how many of them came up to me and told me the same story? She saved my child. She saw what no one else saw. She gave us the courage to leave. 300 people, Rachel. 300 lives directly touched by one woman who, 60 years earlier, had been saved by another woman. Rachel's eyes were wet. Quote, 127, quote. Quote, 128, quote. The documentary took 2 years to make. Rachel interviewed dozens of people, survivors of abusive music training, psychologists who specialized in childhood trauma, lawyers who'd handled custody cases, teachers who'd blown the whistle on colleagues. But the emotional heart of the film was the through line of Evelyn, Dorothy, and Emma. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 2026. The title, ___, quote _ 129 ____. The film opened with audio of a metronome ticking, just the sound over a black screen. Tick-tock, tick-tock, relentless, mechanical. Then the screen showed a drawing, Dorothy's childhood floor plan with its desperate notations. Can't cry, can't breathe, can't live. Then Evelyn's voice, from an interview recorded in 1995, shortly before her death. ___, quote _ 131 ____, quote _ 132 ___. The interviewer's voice pointed out. Other people saw Dorothy. They didn't report. Then they should have. We all should. Every time. Every child. No exceptions. The film traced the story chronologically, using archival footage, photographs, court documents, and interviews. It showed Philadelphia in 1942, a city trying to maintain normalcy during wartime. It showed the child welfare agency's cramped offices, the family court where Judge Whitmore had ruled. It found Margaret Caldwell's boarding house on South Street, still standing though converted to condos. But most powerfully, it showed the faces. Dorothy in 2004, elderly but vital, talking about her mission. Emma in 2024, middle-aged and passionate, explaining how she'd built a career around protecting students. And dozens of others, children saved by Dorothy, grandchildren of children saved by Evelyn, a sprawling family tree of rescue and recovery. The film ended with a montage. Children playing instruments with joy instead of fear. Teachers watching students with protective care. parents supporting rather than pushing, and Emma standing before a classroom saying, quote, 135, quote. The credits rolled over the sound of a violin playing Bach, the same piece Dorothy had played at Evelyn's funeral, the same piece Emma had played at Dorothy's funeral. Not perfect, but beautiful. Free. The documentary won the Audience Award at Sundance. It was picked up by a major streaming service, seen by millions. It sparked conversations in music schools, education programs, family courts. It led to policy changes, mandatory reporting training, support systems for children in high-pressure artistic programs. But more than that, it inspired people. Teachers who'd been hesitant to report abuse found courage. Parents who'd been pushing too hard pulled back. Children who'd been suffering in silence found their voices. And in all of it, always, was Evelyn Marsh's simple example. One teacher in 1942 who'd seen a child's drawings and refused to look away. Who'd risked her career, her reputation, her safety to protect someone else's child. Who'd taught us all that courage doesn't require superhuman strength, just human decency and the willingness to act. Rachel Torres won an Academy Award for the documentary in 2027. In her acceptance speech, she said, __quote _136 __. The camera panned across the audience. Emma Richardson was there, crying openly. Beside her was Lily Chen, the young woman who'd called Child Protective Services about her sister back in 2018. The sister, now a college student majoring in music education, sat on her other side. 3 generations of the chain, linked together, all because one teacher 85 years ago had paid attention. The metronome had stopped ticking. There was only music now. Only love. Only the endless, beautiful chain of human beings choosing to help each other despite the cost. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go, Evelyn Marsh and Dorothy Warren watched together. Proud, grateful, at peace. They'd done what they could, saved who they could save, taught what they could teach. And it had been enough. It would always be enough. Because one person's courage, multiplied across time, can change the world. One child at a time, one extended hand at a time. Forever.